But you're not going to get them unless you take me with you.
I can't do that, Captain. If something went wrong...
Something's already gone wrong. Of course, you could beam down anywhere inside that base, but it would take time to find it.
Star Trek was a failed TV show. Canceled twice, crippled by endless network interference, and born from a rejected pilot that NBC had zero faith in. Yet against every odd, it rose to become one of the most valuable entertainment franchises on Earth, a multi-billion-dollar franchise. However, even with the show's success, there were a lot of behind-the-scenes moments and other events that took place that not even the show's biggest fan could have possibly known. After these reveals, you'll probably never look at Star Trek the same. Number 10. Lucille Ball's Gamble. During the movie era of the 1960s, Lucille Ball was one of the queens of television. Not only did her gorgeous red hair make her stand out, her ability to make millions of people laugh every single week was also what put her in the spotlight. But for some reason, when it came to the series Star Trek, she took on a more serious role in the high-concept science fiction series. But that wasn't the only part she played. Some might even say she's the reason the franchise still exists to this day. Right after the series made waves, there were rumors that Lucy reached into her own bank account to fund the show because NBC refused to pay for a second pilot. While it is not far-fetched, it is not entirely true. The network executives thought it was a great idea to cancel the show even before it aired out of fear that they would go bankrupt. Because of this, the studio's board of directors agreed to cancel the show, but not everyone on the board supported the idea. Lucille, who was a major shareholder of the production, took the risk of using its corporate budget to fund it. This was a calculated business decision rather than a private donation. She pushed her board of directors to move forward with the project, even when they expressed strong doubts about the show's viability. She understood that television needed something fresh. The same show that was on the verge of being canceled went ahead to become one of the most successful science fiction franchises in history. Not only that, it also set the stage for movies about space and advanced technology. Without Lucille's eye for a good show and the talented crew at Desilu, this series would have vanished into the archives by 1964. By taking a massive gamble on a project that looked nothing like her other hits, she helped build the foundation for a universe that changed pop culture forever. It's no surprise why she's the unlikely godmother of the final frontier. But even with the backing of a legendary studio, the show still had to survive the network's boardroom, which almost killed it before it even had a title. Number 9. The Royalty Scheme. The iconic opening theme song of Star Trek is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in history, and the man behind it was a brilliant composer named Alexander Courage. Alongside him and other amazing talents, they were able to create a masterpiece of television that added to the success of the entire series. However, behind the scenes, a strange financial battle was taking place that would leave the composer betrayed. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the show, had a different plan for the theme song. He decided to write a set of lyrics for the song since the original one didn't have any lyrics. The catch was that these lyrics were never intended to be heard. They were never recorded, never sung, and certainly never featured in the opening credits of the show. To the average viewer, the music remained a purely instrumental piece. This was not a mistake, but a strategic financial move. In the music industry, standard contracts require that performance royalties be split evenly between the composer of the music and whoever writes the lyrics, and Roddenberry knew this. Since he held the authority to approve the show's music, he essentially granted himself the role of lyricist. By attaching those written words to the sheet music, he legally became a co-writer. This maneuver meant that every time an episode aired anywhere in the world, Roddenberry received half of the royalty checks that would have otherwise gone entirely to Alexander Courage. When Courage discovered what had happened, he was furious and felt the move was dishonest and exploitative. From his perspective, Roddenberry's unvoiced lyrics added absolutely zero value to the show or to the music itself. They were a hollow addition designed for nothing more than personal profit. Courage saw the action as a breach of professional ethics. In a quiet but firm act of protest, he decided to walk away. He refused to provide any more musical scores for the rest of the first 2 seasons. When other people eventually confronted Roddenberry about the dispute, he remained completely unapologetic about it. For decades, this controversy stayed away from the public ear. Since the lyrics never appeared in the credits and were never heard by the public, most fans had no idea they existed. It took years for historians and memoirs to reveal the truth about this contract dispute. While the music soared to the stars, the reality on the ground was far more grounded in human greed. Financial gains were one thing, but on set, the production was literally becoming a hazard to the cast's health. Number 8. Hazards of the future. It's no news that sometimes certain movies require actors to perform extreme stunts or just go through some form of extremity, and Star Trek was no exception. Some of the cast often found themselves in positions that tested their grit and patience. People often assume the show struggled because of a tiny budget, but that is actually a myth. Star Trek was one of the most expensive shows on television during the 1960s, costing around $185,000 per episode. They even employed a talented stunt coordinator named Paul Baxley to keep things running smoothly. But the real problem was that safety rules for special effects were primitive compared to what most movie sets are used to now. One of the most painful moments occurred during the filming of the episode Arena in Season 1. During this episode, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy stood near a mortar explosion to capture a dramatic shot. Because the soundstage doors were accidentally sealed shut, the noise had nowhere to escape. The blast trapped them in a wall of deafening sound, and both actors suffered from severe, lasting tinnitus as a result of that day. They carried the memory of that explosion in their ears for the rest of their lives. Apart from planned stunts and dramatic shots, they also found themselves in nature's most terrifying moments. During the filming of the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, a hidden wasp nest descended on the set, and a swarm attacked the cast. William Shatner took a direct sting to his eyelid, which caused his eye to swell shut. To keep the production schedule on track, the makeup artists had to work overtime to cover it up. The crew filmed around his injury, choosing specific angles to hide the swelling so the show could keep moving forward. Back to dramatic scenes, in the episode Shore Leave, the production brought in a live, chained tiger. It remained heavily supervised by handlers throughout the day, so it never posed a true threat to the cast. Interestingly, the biggest danger was Shatner himself, who wanted badly to wrestle the tiger for a scene, but the producers and the animal handlers shut the idea down immediately. They knew the risk was far too high, regardless of his desire to make the scene more captivating. The cast and crew survived these moments because they had to. They were professionals working in a time where the industry was still figuring out how to balance big ideas with safety. If you thought the physical injuries were what the crew had to go through, then you're wrong. For some reason, the cast and crew were also fighting a war of ideas behind the scenes. Number 7. The Vietnam Allegory. Gene L. Kuhn was the showrunner of the Enterprise. While Gene Roddenberry dreamed up the big ideas, Kuhn was the one who made those thoughts actually work on screen. He became the brains who kept the series alive. As the head writer and producer of the show, He mixed sharp wit and deep character moments into every script. He had a way of balancing humor and tension that gave the show depth. Without his touch, the series might have felt too rigid for the audience. His crowning achievement in storytelling was the episode A Private Little War, which was set as a direct and uncomfortable mirror to the Vietnam War, which was raging on the evening news during the late 60s. In this particular episode, the Klingons provide advanced weapons to one side of a primitive planet. This forces Kirk to arm the opposing faction to keep a balance of power. The plot echoed the Cold War strategy of proxy wars, where global powers used smaller nations as their chessboard. Kirk even mentions specific 20th century conflicts in Asia during a tense scene with Dr. McCoy. It was a bold move that brought the real world onto the bridge of the ship. You might wonder how this got past the network suits. The NBC censors were actually quite sharp and read every single page of every script. They knew exactly what the writers were doing. They allowed these stories to air not because they were fooled, but because the science fiction setting provided them with a perfect shield. If anyone complained, the network could claim it was simply a story about aliens and flintlocks on a distant planet. It gave them plausible deniability. And it wasn't the only clever trick up the producers' sleeves. In most cases, they intentionally focused the censors on minor details such as costume designs or action scenes to distract them from the heavier political themes buried in the dialogue. This approach was a form of cultural subversion. Most television shows of that era ended with a clean victory for the heroes, but Star Trek chose a different path. The episode ends with Kirk feeling deep guilt for introducing mass weaponry to a peaceful people. He feels less like a hero and more like a man who destroyed the world. This moral ambiguity forced viewers at home to stop and think about their own country's actions. It taught an entire generation to look past the surface of an adventure story and question the cost of global conflict. While Kuhn was writing war stories, Roddenberry was looking to the highest office in the land for his captain's philosophy. Number 6. The New Frontier. While it's true that people like Lucille Ball and Gene Kuhn might have been the reason for the success of the show, it might surprise you to know that the soul of the Enterprise actually started in the Oval Office. Most fans hear the phrase "space, the final frontier," and immediately think of space exploration. However, those words were a direct nod to John F. Kennedy. Back in 1960, Kennedy accepted the Democratic nomination with a speech about a new frontier. He called on the nation to be pioneers facing uncharted areas of science and space. When Gene Roddenberry sat down to write that iconic opening monologue a few years later, he was extending Kennedy's political vision into the stars. The influence went much deeper than a few catchy phrases. Kennedy had established the Peace Corps in 1961 to send Americans abroad for humanitarian aid and education rather than war. The United Federation of Planets became the perfect reflection of that idea. It was an optimistic organization built to offer medical supplies and diplomatic help to the developing world. It existed to explore and provide aid instead of seeking conquest or colonialism. Roddenberry wanted his ship to be a beacon of hope, not a machine of war. He also had a specific vision for Captain Kirk. In his original 1964 pitch, Roddenberry described the commander as a space-age version of Horatio Hornblower. Hornblower was a famous hero from the Napoleonic Wars and a master of the sea who operated far from home. He had to rely on his own wits and the strength of his crew to solve tense international crises. Roddenberry took that independent maritime archetype and layered it with the youthful energy of the Kennedy era. The result was a captain who could handle a diplomatic dispute as well as he could manage a ship. The bridge of the Enterprise was a bold statement during the heat of the Cold War. The show featured a Japanese helmsman, a Russian navigator, an African communications officer, and an alien first officer. They all worked in harmony at a time when the world often felt divided. It was a conscious choice to show a future where international integration was normal. The show presented a world where people from different backgrounds stood together to solve problems. Starfleet was actually never meant to be a military conquest machine. It was designed as a scientific and diplomatic body. Of course, the creators knew that space was a dangerous place. They gave the ship uniforms, ranks, and heavy weapons to handle threats from empires like the Romulans or Klingons. Even then, the show framed fighting as a final resort. The mission always came back to exploration and understanding. It was a version of the future that prioritized curiosity over conflict. Not only was the politics revolutionary, the very way the show sounded was a secret invention. Number 5. Sound design. The sound of a futuristic universe in Star Trek was often built from things you might find in any regular basement. Without access to modern digital synthesizers or computer effects, the sound team for the show had to come up with something, and in doing that, they became inventive problem solvers. They spent their days searching for everyday noises they could tweak to bring the sound effects in the series to life. If you ever wondered why the ship felt so tactile and real, it is because the audio landscape was created using real physical objects. Take the neural parasites from the Season 1 finale, for example. Those alien creatures made creepy, wet, sucking noises as they moved. Those noises were actual recordings of staff members kissing the back of their hands over and over again. These recordings were then layered and looped with extra modulation to produce those sounds. It was a simple trick, yet it created a sound so unsettling that it made the villains feel genuinely organic and out of this world. Another sound that we think was interesting was the hum of the ship, which was another feat of creative engineering. Musician Jack Cookerly took a standard Hammond organ and essentially tore it apart. He rewired the instrument to force it to produce warbling, dissonant electronic chords. This modified organ provided the haunting background ambiance that defined the show from the very first pilot. That same organ formed the core of the iconic transporter sound. To get that famous effect, the team layered in the sound of a glockenspiel played in reverse, after which they mixed with tones from electronic test oscillators to make it sound like a person was truly fading into thin air. Fans have also claimed that the sound of the sliding doors came from blowing into a microphone, but that isn't exactly true since blowing into a mic only gives a muffled rumble. Sound designer Douglas Grindstaff found a much better way to make that mechanical whoosh by recording himself sliding a rubber-soled tennis shoe across a gym floor. Afterwards, he sped up the recording and added the sound of a mechanical paper cutter or a pneumatic pump to give it a sharp, satisfying seal. So every time a door opened on the screen, just keep in mind that a sneaker hitting linoleum was doing the work. The team were relentless with their search for audio bits. The chirping of tribbles was just a collection of slowed-down recordings of doves and owls. The scary growl of the Gorn alien was someone making sounds that were far less glamorous, while the background hum of the ship consoles came from recording the interior noise of heavy air conditioners and exhaust fans in the studio. They did all these without any technological tools, but even with perfect sound and great scripts, the network was still desperate to cancel the show. Number 4. The too cerebral pilot. When NBC executives first sat down to watch the original Star Trek pilot, they didn't see it as a potential success. Rather, they saw a problem. In their official notes, they used phrases like too cerebral and too intellectual to describe what they saw. They believed the show required too much thought from the viewer, and they feared that the average person watching television in 1964 wanted mindless entertainment rather than deep philosophical takes. It was a classic clash between a network looking for safe ratings and a creator aiming to push the boundaries of storytelling. The first pilot, titled The Cage, featured actor Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike. To the network's suits, Pike was a failure. They found him too moody and far too burdened by his own thoughts. They wanted someone who was quick to act, not one who spent his time questioning the universe. The network also took issue with the show's progressive casting. Mahel Barrett played a character known as Number One, who served as the second-in-command, was cold, logical, and incredibly capable. But the network was not ready for a woman in such a position of power. They demanded changes that cut to the very core of the show. Gene Roddenberry had to pivot to keep the series alive. He was forced to turn his thoughtful drama into a faster, more action-oriented show. He replaced Jeffrey Hunter with William Shatner, who brought a different energy to the role. Captain James T. Kirk was designed to be a space cowboy, a hero who was physically bold and ready for a fight. The second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, was intentionally packed with fistfights and intense action sequences. It was the version of the show that finally passed the network test. It is a shame that the network forced these changes because The Cage remains a brilliant piece of work. Historians now look back at it as a masterpiece of the era. This disagreement between the execs and production team created a pattern that lasted for the rest of Roddenberry's career. He constantly battled with executives who wanted simple stories over complex ones. He wrote long, angry letters defending his original vision and criticizing the notes that pushed for more action. It was almost as though the network was forcing him to produce garbage, even as he worked to sneak his real themes into the later episodes. He lost the battle for the first pilot, but he managed to start a war that would redefine what science fiction could do on television. When the network finally decided to pull the plug, the fans did something the industry had never seen before. Number 3. The Save Star Trek campaign. Television networks operated under the belief that they held all the power during the 60s. If an executive decided a show was done, that was the end of the story. NBC had fully intended to cancel the series after its second season, thinking the audience would simply accept the news and move on to something else. They had no idea they were about to face a force they could not control. Two devoted fans named Joe and John Trimble realized that if they wanted to save their show, they needed to turn their passion into a strategy. The Trimbles began a campaign that would change entertainment history forever. They mobilized fans across the country, encouraging them to send letters of support to the network headquarters in New York. This was not a small effort. They provided addresses, outlined talking points, and urged every person who loved the show to take a pen in hand. The result was a tidal wave of paper. NBC offices were soon overwhelmed by more than 1 million pieces of correspondence. The sheer volume of mail was so massive that it became impossible for the network to ignore. Executives at the time were genuinely shocked. They had never encountered such a large, organized group of viewers who were willing to hold a company accountable for its programming decisions. The letters were not just signatures on a petition, they were personal, passionate pleas from people who felt the show represented a future worth fighting for. The weight of that mailbag forced NBC to reverse its decision. The network granted a third season, marking the first time in television history that a series was saved directly by its own audience. This moment created the blueprint for every fan campaign that would follow in the decades to come. The campaign was enough proof that executives weren't the only ones with the power, and that a dedicated community could effectively influence institutional decisions. The term Trekkie grew from a simple label into a badge of honor for a group that had effectively turned into a political force. They had shown the industry that fans were not just passive observers sitting on their couches. They were a powerful demographic that had the ability to shape the landscape of pop culture. By coordinating their efforts and speaking with one voice, they had saved the enterprise, and in doing so, they had given birth to the modern era of fandom. This fan power didn't just stop at saving the show, it eventually reached the halls of NASA itself. Number 2. The Enterprise Legacy. The story of how a television show ended up in orbit begins with a name change. In the mid-70s, NASA was preparing to unveil its very first prototype space shuttle orbiter. The agency had big plans to call it the Constitution to honor the United States bicentennial. It was a patriotic choice that made perfect sense on paper. However, they underestimated the reach of the community that had already saved the show once. The same fan networks, led by Bio and John Trimble, realized that if they could save a series, they could name a real spaceship. They launched a massive, coordinated campaign that skipped right over NASA and went straight to the top. They urged fans to write letters to the White House, and the goal was to convince President Gerald Ford that the ship should be named Enterprise. This was not a small request, but the response was explosive. The White House was flooded with hundreds of thousands of letters. Some estimates suggest the final count reached nearly 400,000. It was a deluge of mail that even a president couldn't possibly ignore. President Ford happened to have a soft spot for naval history, and so respected the legacy of ships that carried the name Enterprise, especially the famous aircraft carrier from World War II. The sheer volume of the fan mail convinced him that this was a popular idea, with a deep connection to the American spirit. He eventually directed the NASA administrators to make the change. The agency complied, and the Constitution became the Enterprise. The rollout ceremony on September 17, 1976, became a legendary moment for not only Hollywood, but for science as well. Gene Roddenberry and nearly the entire primary cast stood on the tarmac to watch the ship take off. That alone was enough proof that the influence of the show had outgrown the television screen. It had entered the history of the country itself. Fans had successfully projected their love for a story into the real world of engineering. The shuttle became a symbol of a generation that grew up watching the stars and then decided to build the ships to reach them. But perhaps the most radical thing they did was not on the shuttle, but on the screen, through a calculated act of sabotage. Number 1. The sabotaged kiss. Apart from Star Trek airing in the 1960s, American history was also facing a volatile time. As the civil rights movement reached a fever pitch, racial tensions simmered across every town and city. For the network executives at NBC, this climate created a state of constant panic. They feared that if they aired anything too controversial, they would face boycotts from conservative stations in the South and lose the advertising money that kept the show alive. They wanted to play it safe at any cost, especially when it came to a scene in the episode Plato's Stepchildren, where Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura were meant to share a kiss. The network demanded 2 versions of the scene. They wanted one where the characters kissed, and a safe version where they simply hugged. Everyone knew the plan was to scrap the kiss and air only the hug. William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols were not about to let that happen and decided to take matters into their own hands. During the filming of the safe takes, they acted in ways that made the footage impossible to use. They crossed their eyes and messed up their lines. During one final take, Shatner even looked straight into the lens and made a silly face, rendering the footage completely unusable for television. The studio was trapped because Reshooting would have been far too expensive, so the network had to use the footage they had. They chose a take where the actors' heads blocked the actual kiss. It ended up being a near miss, but the intimacy was still clearly there. While some people claim this was the very first interracial kiss on American television, the truth is more complicated. Other variety shows had featured such moments before. However, this was the first time an interracial kiss occurred between a white man and a black woman in a scripted dramatic story on prime time. Nichelle Nichols knew the risks were high. She understood that this moment could bring death threats or cause stations to drop the show entirely. She stood her ground because she understood the importance of representation. When the episode finally aired, the network waited for a wave of hate mail that never arrived. Instead, the studio received a massive amount of supportive letters from all over the country. Nichols often talked about a letter she received from a white Southerner who expressed genuine support for the moment. It was a sign that the audience was ready to embrace a vision of the future that the executives were afraid to show. Now, those are all the facts we have for you. Which of these 10 facts shocked you the most? Drop a comment below. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.